gives you the ability to attack partners of those that are directing attacks at U.S. partners. I'm asking, of course, about Iran. Do you have existing Article 2 authority, having identified Iran as a participant in these Houthi attacks, to launch strikes against Iranian assets or Iran itself?
I'd really be overstepping to speculate on authorities that would be cited for strikes that have not taken place. I will say that the President's Article 2 authority was very much relevant in the response strikes in Iraq and Syria following the attack on Tower 22 in Jordan, in which 3 U.S. service members were killed. And I do think that has an impact. That has an impact in Iran's thinking, since the targets included IRGC-affiliated facilities, and it included individuals that IRGC was well known to support in their attacks on the United States. So I think they take that seriously, and they should take that seriously.
Senator Young.
Special Envoy Leonard King. The Houthis had indicated that if they were relisted as a specially designated global terrorist group, that they would expel humanitarian workers and take other actions. We're just days, frankly, into this going into effect, this relisting. Can you provide any update on where those threats stand, as well as the practical implications of this designation on the ground?
Thank you, Senator. I mean, the Houthis took a few actions which honestly haven't had a great deal of impact. They did, as you note, threaten to expel U.S. and U.K. Aid workers in Yemen. There are a number of U.S. and U.K. nationals who do a lot of great work on the humanitarian side in Yemen. From what I understand so far, the Houthis have not made good on those threats. They issued legislation, quote unquote. I say that in quotes because they're not a legitimate government. They're not internationally recognized. They are a militant group and recently designated as a terrorist group also. They took action to designate us. And they've said that they will continue their attacks on shipping. So they've taken a few steps, which I think are mainly for their own public consumption.
You've spent, over the years, you've spent countless days in the region. You may head there again soon. We were discussing before the hearing. Can you describe how the narrative has shifted since the brutal attacks on October 7th in terms of bringing peace to Yemen from before the war to now?
Well, I think a significant number of Yemenis want to see the Yemen conflict ended, and I think it is heartening that, as I mentioned earlier, that the truce which was set in April of 2022 has essentially held inside Yemen. So despite the fact that there is attacks on the Red Sea by the Houthis, by Red Sea shipping, the internal war in Yemen is not heated up. And we're very concerned that that could happen and be another effect, if you will, of a prolonged situation on the Red Sea. So we want to, and by the way, Sen, I think it's important also that the roadmap that I described is something that the parties, that is the Yemen government and the Houthis and the Saudis, all say they still want to see achieved. I think that's important. But
that's where I was headed next.
Yeah, key priority, of course, is to get the Red Sea attacks under control, stopped.
And what if there's ongoing escalation? What will be the implications for your broader efforts to try and reconcile?
No question that a broader escalation or continuation of the status quo undermines the peace effort which we've worked very hard to achieve over the last 3 years, and would, ultimately, I think, degrade our own interests in the region, which are solidly behind seeing a peace effort in Yemen. We do not want a return of al-Qaeda in Yemen. We do not want ISIS building up its capabilities in Yemen. Yemen is a country that, unfortunately, in the past has threatened and led to the deaths of Americans. So stability in Yemen is important to our interest and to those of our partners. So we want to see this effort drive forward. The roadmap that I referred to, Senator, is the best opportunity that Yemen has had for peace since this conflict began.
Before I recognize Senator Cruz, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask a question about China. It's you know, in the last year or so, it's like to sort of style itself as a power broker in the Middle East, and yet here we are in the midst of a real security crisis, which is for so many an economic and diplomatic crisis in the region, and China's nowhere to be found. So, Mr. Leonard King, how does this example of Chinese inaction been helpful for our diplomats, if at all, in pushing back on Chinese diplomatic and financial inroads in the region? Seems like an opportunity to remind people who's really working to affect positive change in the region.
No, Senator, thank you. And it picks up on the questions that Senator Romney also posed about the Chinese role. And we do see a certain degree of freeloading that is absolutely unacceptable. When we talk about an international problem that needs an international solution, we need the Chinese much more aggressively engaged. They are feeling the impact economically of the Red Sea attacks on their own shipping effort. So that is, and I would just assure you that we have a dialogue at my level and at the most senior levels of this government with the Chinese about taking a more responsible role in the Red Sea. Well, and we will continue that.
That's positive. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shapiro, you've worked on Iran-related issues throughout this administration. You were on the team headed by Rob Malley, and you're now at the Defense Department. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has allowed the Iranian regime to build up a ghost fleet of tankers, which are third-country flagged tankers. That fleet grew from about 70 vessels at the beginning of the administration to almost 400 tankers today. The Iranian regime used that ghost fleet to ship over 1 billion barrels of oil and to make unaccountable tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. When Joe Biden came into power, Iran was selling roughly 300,000 barrels of oil a day. Today, due to the Biden administration's appeasement of Iran, Iran is selling roughly 2 million barrels of oil a day. Those billions of dollars went directly to fund terrorism. They went to the Houthis, they went to Hamas, they went to Hezbollah. They pay for the Houthis' terrorism and for their weapons. They paid for the October 7th atrocities in Israel. The Biden administration refused to meaningfully enforce our sanctions, and we're seeing the consequences with war in the Middle East. In your judgment, how has the Biden administration's appeasement of Iran and refusal to enforce sanctions against Iran, how has that worked out for the safety and security of Israel and the safety and security of America?
Thank you, Senator. A number of the questions you raise about sanctions enforcement are the province of the Treasury Department, and I simply, on behalf of the Defense Department, will have to defer to my colleagues there. I will tell you that the subject of the hearing focuses on how we are responding to this particular threat of an Iranian-sponsored and backed organization, the Houthi. Before you arrived, we also spoke a bit about the U.S. response to other Iranian proxies.
Okay, I had a question. How's this working out for the safety and security of Israel and the safety and security of America? You're not answering that question.
The answer I can provide is that we are making very clear to Iran, through our posture in the region, through the assistance we provide to our partners, including Israel, in its need to defend itself, to our own responses when Iran and Iranian-backed organizations have targeted our personnel and tragically have killed 3 of our personnel, and in their sponsorship of the Houthi military strikes against free shipping in the Red Sea, that we will respond. And Iran,
with all respect, that's baloney. And the Ayatollah has heard the message. Let me ask you, how many Ghost Fleet vessels did the Biden administration sanction before October 7th?
Again, sanctions matters belong to the Treasury Department, so I don't
know the answer.
I don't know the answer, and would have to defer to the Department of Treasury.
And is the Biden administration concerned about the billions of dollars they continue to flow to the Ayatollah today? Right now, today, that money is flowing to the Ayatollah because there are 400 ships in the Ghost Fleet that this administration won't sanction. The Ayatollah is selling much of that oil to communist China. The revenue is being used to fund Hamas, to fund Hezbollah, to fund the Houthis. And the Biden administration's response is, well, we made very clear there will be consequences. Baloney. Cut off the money. Why will the Biden administration not cut off the money from Iran?
Senator, I really have to stay in the lane of the Department of Defense. What we have made very clear.
Did you work with Rob Malley and his task force?
I worked for a few months as an advisor to then Special Envoy Malley. Yes.
And you were ambassador to Israel. You have long experience in the region. I find it impossible that you have no views on the $100 billion plus that Joe Biden has gifted to the Ayatollah that has been used to murder Americans and murder Israelis. I'm asking you, isn't it time to cut off the money?
On behalf of the Defense Department, what I can say is that when we see Iran, which we do see on a daily and regular basis, supporting terrorism, providing weapons, providing intelligence, providing sponsorship and training to terrorist organizations, we make very clear to Iran that
but
not
you
only
don't make clear. If they continue to have the money, you're not making it clear. If you say, here's $100 billion, but you know what? We're going to send you a stern letter. Well, that $100 billion is being used to fund weapons. Let me ask you, all right, and it's not just Iran, by the way, the Houthis. Listen, the Trump administration rightly designated the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. Within a month of taking office, what did the Biden administration do? Delisted the Houthis. Now, finally, last month, the Biden administration was forced to relist the Houthis and to designate them as a specially designated global terrorist group. How did it work out, delisting the Houthis for 3 years? Did they behave just quietly, or did they continue to be the terrorists they've been the whole time, even while the administration was trying to appease them?
Some of this is Special Envoy Len King's province. What we have done, as the Houthis have demonstrated through their actions that they are behaving as a terrorist organization, is not only that designation, but also the defensive operation of Operation Prosperity Guardian.
So prior to January of this year, they weren't behaving as terrorists?
They were not shooting at ships in the Red Sea until
Were they terrorists last year?
Of last year?
Were the Houthis terrorists last year?
They were designated as a designation that took
I'm asking you, is it DOD's view? Were the Houthis terrorists in 2023? Yes or no?
They were a designated terrorist organization as of a few days ago when it took office on February.
And your delisting them was indefensible, and it's proven catastrophic.
Just as a quick follow-up, Mr. Shapiro, to Mr. Cruz's line of questioning, forces in the region have interdicted shipping. Special Envoy Leonard King referenced it earlier, interdicted the shipments from Iran over to Yemen for a number of years running. Can you describe briefly, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Senator Barrasso, Mr. Shapiro, how's the smuggling situation evolved since October 7th and since we've surged our forces into the Red and Arabian Sea?
Thank you, Senator. The smuggling continues. We know that it continues. I think to get into details to describe exactly what we are seeing, the volume, the routes, the shipments would probably require speaking in a closed session. But because we continue to see those efforts we have undertaken, and NAVCENT in particular has been in the lead on this, enhanced efforts to identify and then interdict those shipments when we see them. We do communicate with various partners who could also bring that capability to interdict. Ambassador Leonard King and I have worked together on looking at opportunities to strengthen the inspection mechanism of UNVIM, which tanker shipments that are on their way into the Hodeidah port of Yemen are also searched for weapons. This is a work in progress. So I believe the smuggling does continue, but because we know it continues, we are upping our efforts to interdict those shipments.
Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this meeting. Mr. Lenderking, last week I was in Djibouti. We have 140 members of the Wyoming Air National Guard there. They're right there at the tip of activities. It's a hot spot. What we see is happening, with attack on the ships that are trading to the point where they can't get through the Suez Canal. They can't get insurance. They're going around Africa. It's adding about 12 days to the transit time. Concern adding to the costs significantly, the impact of foreign trade. All of these things as a result of the Houthis and what they're doing in that area, aiming at ships, some with drones, sometimes with missiles. It's only about 11 miles that I was there at the point, looking how close things were. So they're in a hot spot. The day I get back, the New York Times has this big expose about the fact that the administration has really fallen down on the job of trying to prevent the sale of Iranian oil to China. They reported 59 million barrels of oil on, they described them as shadowy tankers that left Iran, and all of these have ended up in China. And then the cash from all of this ended up in Iran, and they said at the lowest prices of oil it would be $2.8 billion, but likely much more as prices fluctuate. Secretary of Treasury came to Congress. She testified, this is before that report came out, that, things are fine, that we're doing everything we can. American people don't believe it. The soldiers that are there risking their lives don't believe it, because that's the money that's being used. There was 140 attacks by the Houthis, funded and by Iran, on American soldiers in the last 4 months. We know where the money's coming from. A lot of it's coming from the sale of oil that we should be blocking, or other funds that go from the United States. I think the administration has failed completely. I think the president is just being outworked and outplayed and outmaneuvered by the Iranians. I think the world is seeing a diminished president who's just not up to the job. What are you doing from the standpoint of the State Department to prevent this ongoing effort to sell, for Iran to be able to continue to sell to China? I mean, they're working together, and Iran's also giving drones to Russia. You have North Korea being belligerent as well. It just seems that we are not where we want to be. As a State Department official, what's your response to all this?
Well, thank you, Senator. First of all, for visiting Djibouti. It's not necessarily everybody's first, thought of where to go, but we have important interests there. I've been there 3 times in this particular job, so I'm aware of the details about which you speak, and we do have a very important interdiction and inspection operation for Yemen ships that is based in Djibouti, called the UN Verification and Inspection Mission. But certainly agree with you that the Iranians are not supposed to be able to sell that kind of oil to China. I think there are very vigorous efforts to counter that with our partners and allies, and that kind of funding I think that you are speaking about is in violation of not only U.S. interests but also numerous UN Security Council resolutions.
Yeah, well, and it does seem that it was the New York Times expose that actually brought it to the fore, because the administration seems to be unaware of all of this that was happening out there.
I think the administration, I'm not the Iran expert, Senator, but I think the administration is aware of it and would certainly look into these reports in more depth now that they've been...
If they're aware of it, then they tried to mislead Congress intentionally, because the Secretary of Treasury said we're doing absolutely everything possible, and then all of a sudden this gets showed to the world from a press coverage. So anything you want to add on this? Okay. Well, we can go on and on. The other thing that I saw in Djibouti, and I asked you to comment on this, and you saw as well, China is building a large base there. You can see it from the air coming in. You can see it from the ground. China's making significant investments in that area. Our base in Djibouti was an old French Foreign Legion base, which is why it's named after the commander of the base at the time. But communist China is making significant investments right in that area, where the Gulf of Aden comes down and then goes up into the Red Sea. And from a State Department standpoint, anything that you're noticing with that and we need to be concerned with?
Well, certainly, Senator, I think we are very conscious and aware of Chinese expansion in the Gulf region, which is by and large not in our interests. I think that's very much a part of the engagement that we have with the Chinese and also our partners in the region and in East Asia as well.
Okay. And then to Mr. Shapiro, last month, Qatar Energy decided to suspend all transits through the Red Sea. This led to the shipments being forced, as I talked about, around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, adding significant delays, about a day, probably 12 days added in Israel, much more fuel being expended to move the product around. Same time, Russia, Iran are both building up their LNG export capacity. Europe's energy supply be helped or hurt by President Biden's decision to reduce American LNG exports, actually putting a pause on that, given that the supplies from Qatar are now forced to go around Africa?
Senator, I'm certainly not an expert on energy markets or energy export policies, so I think I'll decline to answer the question.
Well, it's hurting. It's
Sorry?
hurting. I'll just tell you the answer.
Yeah.
It's hurting.
May I address your question about China, if that's all right?
Please.
Because China's been mentioned on a couple of occasions, and I think it's actually quite noteworthy. One of your colleagues mentioned that what's quite clear is that China is playing no role to help with this multilateral international effort to defend legitimate shipping in the international waterways. And it is one of those moments when I think it has become clear to many of our partners in the region, sometimes when people ask questions, are they going to remain committed to the U.S., or they ask, will the U.S. remain committed to the region, or will they have alternative security partners? They do not have an alternative security partner in China. There is nobody other than the United States who will do what we are doing to defend freedom of navigation in this region. And so I actually think it's been a moment of clarity about U.S. influence in this region in this regard.
I don't know if either of you want this question, you comment. What is the administration's strategy to ensure Europe is not forced to turn to Iran and Russia for LNG now that the U.S. is not wanting to export based on the president's new policy?
I think it's a bit beyond the Defense Department's area of focus.
Well, it's indefensible. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Barrasso. Let me thank both of you for being here today. In particular, Envoy Leonard King, let me thank you for all the hard work that you had done previous to the eruption of this conflict to try to bring a political settlement to the people of Yemen. I know we were close, and I think one of the reasons why we need to place an imperative and a priority on bringing to close this round of hostilities is so that you and others can get back to the work of trying to midwife that political compromise. I noticed an individual with a resemblance in the audience, and so I want to welcome your father and stepmother to the hearing today. You should be very proud of the work that your son has done to try to bring peace to a region that has been without it for far too long. With that, thank you both for your testimony. Senator Young and I were just commenting this has been one of the most substantive and wide-ranging hearings that we've had on this committee. We're going to keep the record open for members to submit questions until the close of business Thursday, and with thanks to the subcommittee, this hearing is now adjourned.